Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the IFlight Baby Nazgul 73. Or at least I'm calling this the 73 because when you look on the IFlight website, you'll actually see that they just refer to this as the Baby Nazgul because they do have another one that's very, very similar. It's 63 millimeters, motor post to motor post. It runs 31 millimeter props, but tonight we're looking at this one, which has a lot of the same components, but some slight differences, and we'll cover those. We'll also do a comparison between those two, as well as the FlyWoo micro that recently came out. We'll have some comparisons there along the way. And before I forget, the board in here does support adding a receiver to it. So if you wanted to add an Express LRS, yeah, it's got a T and R pad that you can use for that, or for CrossFire or Tracer or Ghost or any other receiver that you might want to add to this. But it doesn't come pre-sold like that. Pre-sold, it comes with a D8 receiver that's FR Sky. So our range is somewhat limited. It comes with these 0802 17,000 kV motors. And on those motors are the 40 millimeter Gym Fan bi-bladed props. We have our 1S all-in-one board here. And the VTX right up there is the same. It is a 25 to 50 milliwatt VTX. Our camera here is the Runcam Atom, mounted in a TPU, and it does have these little extensions for some camera support. This one is bottom mounted, and they have a TPU support to hold our pigtail here for our battery lead. And that battery lead is the rolled pins that, yeah, they'll need to be replaced eventually. Might be 200 flights or something, but the performance will degrade over time. It weighs 25 3/4 grams. The main flight that I'm going to show you is on this Xylo 450 milliamp 1S battery, which brings the weight to just about 39.5 grams. I also flew it on this G&B 720 milliamp battery in a slow, cruisy sort of flight time sort of flight. And with that battery, we get 42 3/4 grams. And as previously mentioned, I get 73 millimeters motor post to motor post. Bottom plate is 2 millimeters thick. Top plate is 1 millimeter thick. It does come with some repair hardware, a Phillips screwdriver, and a hex tool. I think it only comes with one set of extra props, but check your product descriptions. Again, this flight is going to be on that Xylo 450 milliamp 1S battery. That is a pretty new battery to my group. My apologies to Get FPV. I mistakenly ordered one battery. So it just so happens that this one flight that I'm going to show you is on that one battery. I'm not necessarily endorsing that battery just of yet because, you know, most of my other batteries have a lot of flights on them, whereas this doesn't have very many flights. Typically when I order batteries, I get at least 4 because that gives me a broader sample. But if you want to try these out, you know, Get FPV carries these Xylo batteries. I've heard good things about them. That's why I intended to buy more than one. My apologies to those that work at Get FPV for ordering one battery. But this is going to have more performance than you're going to see on the version that's 63 millimeters. It's just kind of the prop efficiency. The motors are actually lower kV than on the 63 millimeter version. Although the 63 millimeter version of this has a top mounted battery, which does have a little bit of a flight feel difference. So you may enjoy that and may want to get that just for that flight feel factor, but this one is going to have longer flight time. It's not so battery centric. This flight's going to come in, end in a crash, near very close to the end of the battery at just under 4 minutes. And commonly on most of my flights, I was getting somewhere around 3 minutes and 20 seconds to 3 minutes and 45 seconds. This one happened to be a little bit longer. I'm also going to have a little bit of a crash reel. I've got some one flight inside. I gave myself one flight to fly inside. You know, I didn't want to ding the house all up. I still want to keep my privileges to being able to fly inside. So I had a number of crashes trying to get used to flying inside. I don't recommend you do that, but you know, sometimes people come to the channel and say, "Oh, you should have flown it inside." Well, yeah, sometimes I will do that, but not with all these unprop guarded micros. Also, we'll do some flight samples for flight efficiency, you know, those slow exploratory sort of cruisy flights on a 450 and a 720. The 850 that I have, it didn't feel like it was going to fit in the battery strap very well, so I tried to get it in there, and when I thought I was using too much force, then I decided, okay, I'm not going to use that battery. But you could probably get that in there and maybe replace the stock battery strap with one that is a rubber band, so you can get a larger battery in there. Although I did find on a 720, once you get over a 520 milliamp battery, that aggressive flight style, it it starts to have a negative impact once you get above that 520 milliamp weighted battery. Now, the 720, it took a lot to recover from dives or from very aggressive moves, whereas if you're at the 520 or the 450, I felt you had much better control, much better recoverability, and just much better overall performance. But if you're doing exploratory cruisy flying, the 720 would probably be something that you might be interested in, because the flight time does come in at almost 9 minutes. At least in my case, it came in at almost 9 minutes. And something else about this quad is I'm starting to enjoy this RunCam Atom camera. I do wish the field of view were wider. That gives us a greater sense of speed. But I thought the overall performance of a camera that's this small and this light is pretty good. And I flew it a few times in the evenings, especially those, now the sun's starting to go down a little bit sooner. And I found that, right around sunset at about 7:30 our time, that this camera still did very well, and you felt like you were flying during the day. So that's something else that you might consider. Both versions of this come with that camera. The FlyWoo does not come with that camera. It comes with the original RunCam Nano 3 and a different lens. Well, I say RunCam Nano 3 because it looks just like it. And there you see, I banged into the fence. I went ahead and decided to show you this flight, and we have the battery at 3.65 volts. We could have gone 4 minutes pretty easy. This is going to be a little bit of a crash reel. This is my inside flight. Again, I gave myself one battery to fly inside because I didn't want to ding the house all up. So we're going to start this section of a flight sample with a crash, and we'll have another crash, and then we'll end this little sample on a crash. Again, I'm doing this for fun just because, this is my hobby. I like to have fun. Sometimes when I have a micro on the channel and I don't fly it inside, I have a few comments. They're not negative comments or anything. It's just, people want to see me fly it inside. So I thought I would give it a go. Of course, one battery isn't much to kind of get used to that lack of, not response, but, you have your margin for error is so small. And this gives you a sample of that. Plus, it also kind of confirms to everybody who thinks I don't crash. I still crash a lot. And, crashing is part of this hobby. Repairs are part of this hobby. And I think I was just telling somebody the other night that we kind of have to be prepared for crashing in the hobby. And be prepared for repairs that we might need to do. And try to enjoy those things, because it should all be fun. Yeah, it's tough on our pocketbooks from time to time, but it should still be fun. And sometimes you all who've come to the channel for a long time, you've heard my audio camera that I have sitting on the table. You've heard me laugh when I have a crash, because sometimes it's just a silly mistake. I don't know what my brain and fingers are doing, but it's just a silly mistake and I crash. So try to enjoy it. Understand that, we're not perfect pilots. We're going to crash, and try to have fun with the hobby. This particular flight, I think I ended, you won't see it, but I ended this flight with my attempts of flying inside at over 5 minutes on a 450 milliamp 1S battery. So, not that you should be flying it inside, but if that's what you're looking for, you can expect a longer flight time, because, well, you just can use less thrust inside because of that margin for error. This is an evening time, slow, cruisy flight. This is actually getting closer to 8 o'clock. And I want to show you just kind of the last minute of this so you get an idea of how I'm flying it to get the flight time that I do get. You don't expect to get a rippin' fast flight and still get that long flight time. This would be, an extreme sort of eco sort of flight where you're trying to see exactly how much flight time you can get. Of course, there's huge variables in our batteries, our quality of batteries, the maintenance of our batteries, how old the batteries are, how many flights they've had on them. So what I have in the video may be different than what you get, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the possibilities. You might get more if your batteries are in better shape. We're going to end here, and you can see our flight time is over 6 minutes, and our battery recover up back to above 3.5 volts, which is where I try to end my flights. This is our extra long flight on the G&B 720 milliamp battery. Again, this is evening time. I believe it was the same evening of the 450 Eco flight. Nice calm evening. It's relatively dark out. I don't have my audio camera. That's why you don't hear it. I was just out testing this stuff. I didn't know if I would show this stuff in a picture-in-picture or if we'd go full screen on it. But I wanted to give you an idea, again, of a larger battery, the flight style, and the flight time. This flight comes in at 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I believe. and I think we could have gotten a few more seconds out of that, especially if you do longer runs. If you're in a bigger space, you'll probably get more time out of the flight than I did. But we've ended 8 minutes 46 seconds. I was right, and our battery has now come back up to above 3.5 volts per cell. So let's cover this one before we start doing the comparisons. I mentioned it that this gets kind of tight with a battery, and oftentimes our batteries have these little edges that can pop out, which can make it kind of fussy. Excuse my phone there for a calendar reminder. But the way I found it best is to just kind of get my thumb behind it here and just kind of press the battery in. Hopefully I can do it on camera here. Should have started with a smaller battery. I started with the biggest one, and you could probably start to see why flying with the 850 really wasn't feasible, because I was struggling to get it in. There we go. And this is a good, strong, I think it's a 3D print, but it's good and strong, and it does hold a 720. Going up to an 850, you might be able to do it, but I felt like I was going to possibly break this. Also note that this strap does not loop around. It is actually just kind of pressed on, before the all-in-one flight controller goes on. They've probably put this on here and then mounted the flight controller and our nylon standoffs and everything here. Also, obviously we're using connectors. They didn't use any of my favorite tape to secure the motor wires down, which isn't a big deal. The motor wires stayed down for the most part, but if you go tumbling through a tree or a bush or something like that, it's probably better to have those taped down, because then you have less likelihood that a little tiny branch or something will get in there. And so if you're high up and you get hung up in there, not great. I mentioned the Runcam Atom. I'm an advocate for having different camera angle, because that allows more people to fly in different ways naturally without having to lower your view in the goggles or raise your view in the goggles, depending upon what sort of flight. But you will see here that we've just on both of these, they both have this. They've printed this and slid this over the post so that we do have some camera protection. So the likelihood that you'll hit the camera on something, it would have to be something that would essentially fit between these posts, and we line it up perfectly right between there. So our camera should be fairly well protected. I covered this in the original, but do note, hopefully you can see it right down here. The VTX is connected via pins. That can be a potential issue long term over a course of crashes, that those pins can get loose. So you can find where you might have a video breakup or blackout or lose smart audio control if one of those pins has come loose. I had some pretty severe crashes, which I showed a few of them up there. I only pull out the severe crashes because if it just lands softly in the grass, that doesn't really show you anything. But I had a series of those, so I plucked out the more serious crashes that I had. Didn't bend any motor shafts, but you see also just below the VTX, we have a little bit of that whiteness here. That's probably either glue or some sort of double-sided foam tape. And I do find the boards pretty well secured, but I did find that the tiny little micro connector here for our receiver antenna did pop loose on me. And unfortunately, I flew it part of a pack with that off, so hopefully I haven't damaged this. But something to note, that if you get one, I would put a little dab of, say, welder or your favorite adhesive right over that connector to make sure it has a little bit more security in those crashes. My first few crashes, no problems, but eventually there was a crash that I had on the cement where I think I hit the fire pit and then it popped off. That was the flight where I then took back off and I flew without the antenna connected, which is never a good idea. I did find their print over here held on to the battery connector fairly well. It does kind of spin around. You could also cut some weight by removing this. You can see that the flight controller is below the prop line. So with our battery underslung, we don't necessarily need our connector up here. We could take this TPU print off. We can let the connector kind of sag down here, and I don't think the prop will be chopping that up or getting stopped by that connector. I think it'll work just fine. These battery leads are pretty short, so once you get it connected, if you find you've got a little wrinkle or something that comes up into the prop line, I just shove that stuff down and go about my flight. Also on the weight side, you can remove the connectors and solder the wires on if that were to be something you take on. But do note how close together those pads are. That is not simple soldering. That is kind of some fine soldering. Something to consider there. I do appreciate the fact that they put these little notches in the top, which they didn't do on this one because they didn't really need to, I guess. They found another way. They just kind of routed it. You can kind of see it. It's routed underneath the VTX and out the backside. but they put a little hole in the top carbon plate and they routed the antenna that helps to keep this antenna somewhat away from our video antenna. Also note on the back of the VTX, we do have the connector for the camera. I mentioned it in the quick roll, but these little pads, hopefully you can see them down there. I can get enough light. There's, by the gold button, there's a couple pads, and so you can add a receiver. Say if you wanted to add an EP2 or the little Express LRS that's got the plastic or square antenna on there, you do have an R2 and T2 pad that you can use to put that on there. I don't know the impact of whether that would have an impact to smart audio or not. Hopefully the UART2 is tied to the onboard receiver, so then it was just disable it. And obviously with the gold button there, if you were to need to flash, if you wanted to flash Betaflight, don't flash working quads unless you got more than one quad. We've heard that from me a few times. You do have the button there so you can get into DFU mode. We've got hex screws just about in all of our main body locations, and then we've got Phillips screws out here on the end. That's not unusual with these little motors, you know, below the 08 series and on down. We tend to find Phillips headed screws, which is okay. We don't need to really screw those down hard, so a small Phillips screwdriver, which they include with the kit, will help you put that together just fine. You don't have to put it together if you need to replace a motor. Also with the propellers, I almost skipped over that. When it comes to you're going to see a gap in the propeller to where the propeller is not down on the motor bell. Something that's important, especially in unprop guarded micros. Get those propellers down all the way to the motor bell. That will minimize the likelihood that you bend a motor shaft. And when you bend a motor shaft, then you either get video in your camera, or excuse me, you get jello in your camera, or you have flight issues and possibly shorter flight time because that throws off the PID tune, that extra vibration, you know. Our quads don't like that. So when you get yours out of the box, you won't see that little bit of metal sticking up. Take your fingernails, hopefully you've got a little fingernail, or take a tool, whatever you need, get it evenly on both sides and press it down, and you'll hear it kind of snap. And then when you look at it from the side, you'll see that the prop hub is all the way down on the motor bell. And that's what I would recommend. That's going to, again, protect our shaft from bending, because these are only 1mm shafts. But quite honestly, with the Zing motors from IFlight, I've had pretty good luck with not bending these. Happy Model motors, I've bent a few shafts. Matter of fact, I might have, well, I've got some broken shafts over here from 1102s, but that's really not what we're talking about. Oh, here we go, I found one. So this is a scavenger motor. I've taken some C-clips off of this one. I'm pretty sure that motor stem is bent a little bit, and that's why I stopped using it. So 1mm motor shafts are more likely to bend, but we've stayed pretty light. But if you're flying a bigger battery, like a 720, or maybe even gone with that 850, you're increasing the weight, so you're increasing the impact when you do have a crash. So get those props down. I think I've hit that on the head plenty hard now. I did kind of wish this would be top mounted, because there is a different feeling in the flight characteristics, but unfortunately, you know, probably because size, I think you could probably force this to be top mounted. You're going to have to do something with your antenna like they did with the 63mm version in order to be able to mount this, and then use a strap or a rubber band, whatever you choose to get this on top. As you can see here, hopefully, if you route things down like they did on the 63mm version, that you will be able to run it top mounted if you want it. It's not set up out of the box for that. As far as a comparison between these two, this one, really the only advantage it has is it's natively set for that top mount, which is a different flight feel that some people really enjoy. I like it, but it's not necessarily my favorite, nor is it a deal breaker for me on me having fun with flight. I don't need it to be top mounted. Also, this adds a fair bit of weight as well. Everything else is going to be just about identical to the same. We get a lot more efficiency, we get a lot more pep, we get more flight time out of running larger props on essentially lower kV motors. And that might surprise some of you, because these are 22,000 kV motors on tri-blades, but these spin up faster and they give you more punch, and they give you a better efficiency, like I said, when you run a bigger prop on a lower kV motor. It just works out that way. And you know, so these are going to be essentially, I think, the same price. I'll have a link down in the video description to the iFlight website, or wherever you can pick these up from. Hopefully they're available near a shop near you, or where you like to buy. If you're looking at the Firefly Baby here, I think the main thing that a big difference is, one, you have more receiver options with this one. So if you didn't want to fly FrSky D8 protocol, you could get a Happy model or an Express LRS or a FlyWoo, a tiny little micro receiver on here with all sorts of range. This also has a stronger milliwatt VTX in it. I think, if I recall correctly, this is 200 milliwatt, and this one does fly longer. But when it comes to more aggressive flight, I think this is the winner. So if you want to go out and do the flippy floppies, if you want to race around, this would be the one out of the three that I pick. But if you want long flight time, then you're looking at the Firefly Nano. If you just like a smaller, it's just smaller. Sometimes we just want something that's smaller. Then you might want to get the 63 millimeter version. But I think the 73 millimeter version will give us more performance. I like all three of these that I've shown you, and they're a little bit different depending upon what you want. I'll link my original review to the Firefly Nano Baby, I think is what it's called, or it might have one S in the name. I'll link my original review down in the video description. If you happen to miss that, you can go back and watch that. So the talking points that I covered might come to light, in video format there. And I'll also have a link to where you can buy these. These are the 63 and 73 millimeter editions of the Baby Nazgul. Again, I would prefer the 73 millimeter edition. I just think it's more fun. I do wish it had Express LRS for added range, and I do wish it had a more powerful VTX. In my space, it did just fine. If you need to go back and look at the flight footage, if I go around that bush where that brick chimney is, that's the heaviest breakup that I saw with it. But if you go to parks that are big and you like to go out and fly those big parts and stretch your quad legs, you may find that the VTX isn't powerful enough for you. It's really going to vary quite a bit. And always, if you're flying alone, fly Raceband 8. That will give you the best possible reception and the least possible interference, specifically from Wi-Fi interference, which for the most part is kind of everywhere these days, right? The price point that I see on here comes in at about $130. I'll have links to, like I said, several shops down below. I do have coupon codes for Banggood and Makerfire that save you 5 and 8%. And also the Banggood code is limited, 10 uses per person, and that runs through the end of the year. So if you've already used the code 10 times, you can't use it 11 times until we turn over to a new year or they give me a new code or something like that. I do understand that this code is not working for those of you in Europe. I have asked them about that. Maybe they've changed it. I'll ask them again tonight to see if I can nudge them in the right direction to make sure this code works in as many countries as possible. The person I've spoken to about it has stated that's not in their control, but they are going to ask. So if you're in Europe, go ahead and try the code out. I apologize if it doesn't work. I wish I could save you some more money, but maybe go the Makerfire route in that case. But there'll be links down in the video description. I sure want to know what you think of these little quads. I'm very biased. I like micros and IFlight. I'm still waiting for that 2S version. I'm looking forward to 2S. You have an all-in-one board that runs 2S, because I think these would be even more fun on 2S. But again, that's my preference. What's your preference? Let me know down in the comment section. If you do have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.